wrong today. Back in the day, Saul, it was yell and scream, and fear was a way of coaching back in the day. But I wonder if you could talk about the generation of coaches and maybe anybody else on here. I'm dealing with parents today and talk about taking away the joy of the game and attacking coaches. It's it's really a a very serious undermining influence on what the good of the game and what sports can do for young people.
Yeah, well, I give a talk sometimes to coaching groups on the biggest mistakes that coaches make. And I list 10 of them. And the first three are, and it's changing. I mean, there is growing awareness and people are doing a better job. But the first three are number one, negative eyes, way too much negativity. And certainly we have to have, as coaches, we want to hold people accountable, but the focus is way too negative. The second one is a lack of emotional control. And again, we're seeing much better handle on that. And the third one is, and well, I think maybe one of the biggest of all is I call it a lack of sensitivity. And by that I mean coaches tend to broadcast on a certain band. Again, some are more confrontational, some are more nurturant and supportive, some are more giving you a whole lot of technical input, some are more on the positive emotional side. So a lot of coaches are not aware of their style of communication. If some of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs, it's a good test, and it looks at four different dimensions: extroversion, introversion, thinking, feeling, and a couple of others. Some coaches are just not aware that they're very confrontational, and they're not aware of who they're talking to. So if you're an extroverted, confrontational style coach, Tortorella type coach, and you're talking to a extroverted kind of individual, you can challenge them and they'll go out and do it. Jeremy Roenick was like that. Tiger Williams was like that. If you're talking to a more sensitive athlete and you're in their face, they shrink from it. It's counterproductive. So this lack of awareness of who you are and who you're talking to, that's a big issue. And again, people are becoming more aware of who they are, and they're becoming more sensitive to who the audience they're talking to. But those are the big three. Lack of preparation. There's a few others, but those are the big three: being negative, being emotional, and not realizing how you're coming across. And I told Wally the story the other day. I was working with one NHL team. I won't mention Mark Crawford's name. And he was yelling at everybody. I mean, he was yelling at the officials, he was yelling at the other team, and he was yelling on the bench at us. And I was getting feedback from the players saying it's a distraction. There's too much emotion on the bench. So I go to Mark and I said, Mark, I'm getting feedback from both the vets, and I won't throw players under the bus, but I said, look, from both the vets and the young guys, that there's too much emotion, too much yelling. So they didn't hire me next year. I mean, that's the downside sometimes of, kill the messenger. But you got to say these things because, mind you, I worked with Keaton. I would never say that to Mike. I'd be too afraid of him. But, that's the way it is. That's the way it was. And I think it's changing, but it's still, coaches get fired like that. Players don't get fired. I'm talking at the pro level. And and I guess even in the Western Hockey League, that level of elite amateur, well, it's not amateur exactly. So coaches are anxious. They're anxious. If we're not doing this right, if we're not winning, I'm going to get fired. They're coming from fear, and they project their fear back on the players. And if you take that all the way down to little kids playing,